Hey everybody, Brett from AstartesGaming here, back with another video on Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord. So, I posted a video a couple weeks back covering Bannerlord, specifically the map in comparison to Mount & Blade Warband's map, and also a look at the Warband factions versus the Bannerlord factions and how they might relate. So, there was a lot of talk in the comments, and one of the hotter topics in there was the origin, the influence, and the future of the Battanian faction. One of the smallest factions in Bannerlord, but probably one of the most interesting if I have anything to say about it. Anywho, we're going to take a closer look at the Battanians today, and I'm going to tell you why I think... I don't want to give it away right now, but I'm going to tell you why I think my particular opinion is the correct opinion, and a lot of people shared this one as well, which is why I think it is the correct one. Why I think this particular influence is the right one, and how they relate to the factions or don't relate to the factions that we've talked about. So in the background I've got some gameplay from Bannerlord going on. This is from PC Gamer, I believe. They had like a little gameplay showing with Tail Worlds, and in this video they do show the Battanian cities and the Battanian units to a small extent. They're playing as part of the Battanian faction, and so you get to see a little bit of it. It's not a real detailed look, but it's something to go on. So let's go ahead and get started. First thing I want to do is talk about Rhodoks, because Rhodoks was one of the factions sort of mentioned in relation to the Battanians. And so I want to tell you why I don't think Rhodoks really has anything to do with them. So, if you weren't familiar with Rhodoks, they're based on medieval northern Italy. And if you're not convinced of that already, Google search medieval northern soldier, or medieval northern warrior, something like that. You'll basically get pictures of a guy that looks just like the green-clad soldier on the screen right now. They've got classic kettle helms or something similar. They are carrying pikes, spears, and crossbows, exactly what you would expect from a Rhodoks soldier. And they've got the chainmail, stuff like that. Occasionally some plate armor, but they're medieval northern Italy, almost exactly, almost to a T. So we're assuming that's fact right now. You might want to debate that, but for the purposes of this video, we're going with that. They rely mostly on crossbows and pikes, as I just mentioned. One distinction from medieval northern Italy is that Rhodoks doesn't use cavalry. The Italians did use cavalry, albeit I don't think they used it to the same extent that like the French or the English might have, but they did use it, and they're located in the southwest corner of the map. So all these things together are a lot of reasons to me why it just doesn't add up. Yes, they do have the best range units in the game, but they're not really related in any other way, and just to go on that, to me, doesn't really seem like enough. Furthermore, crossbows and longbows are not at all the same thing, and to be good with a crossbow is not the same as being good with a longbow. You can't just pick up one or the other and be amazing at both. It doesn't work that way. They're completely different weapons. So a faction good with crossbows and a faction good with longbows probably wouldn't be good at the other. If you train all your, spend all your time training with a longbow, you don't have any time to train with a crossbow, and it's not, to me, it's not like a natural progression. I just don't see it. Again, we're looking at a faction that really likes pikes and big shields, and with the Battanians we sort of see more, the shields are smaller, they look more, what's the word? They're almost like round bucklers from what we see in this gameplay video. I think they're going to show it fairly soon here. But yeah, the shields don't look the same. The weapons aren't the same. They seem to favor like swords and axes and things like that. You don't really see a whole lot of pole arms, and the ones you do are mostly like, average length spears. So I think we can safely eliminate Rhodoks. I just don't see any relation there. I know it's tempting because both factions have really good range units, but that is where the similarities end. So next I want to talk about a faction that was a very popular choice for you guys to relate to the Battanians, and that was the Vaegirs. So the Vaegirs are based on early medieval Russia, and that might be a little bit too specific. I would probably say that something more general like medieval Eastern Europe, and even that's probably too vague because they're very heavily influenced by like Russia, maybe the Cumans in Turkey, stuff like that. The Holy Roman Empire really doesn't factor in there because that's too Germanic, I would say. So Eastern Europe is a bit too vague. But yeah, so if you look at early medieval Russia, you get a pretty good indication of who the Vaegirs are. In Warband, they're very well rounded. They have pretty solid cavalry. In my opinion, the second best, but arguably the third behind the Sarranids, depending on who you talk to. Their archers, I think, are undoubtedly the second best in the game, following Rhodoks, and again, they're probably the best bowmen in the game, Rhodoks being the best crossbowmen. So, aside from that, their infantry is good but not great, and they seem to favor offense over defense. Their armor is not the best, and they like two-handed weapons. They tend to forego shields to do more damage. And so all those things together actually make them sort of sound like a good fit. And I think gameplay-wise, they are basically the same faction. I think the Battanians are filling the void that the Vaegirs leave from not being in Bannerlord. You have a faction that's very offense-oriented. They like to ambush. They hide out in the forest. They come at you with, two-handed swords and longbows and stuff like that. But I think that is more for gameplay balance and less for any kind of relation in lore. They're also located in the northeast, which is pretty far from where the Battanians are located. I don't see any sort of migration happening there. So honestly, I think Vaegirs just doesn't add up. And I'll tell you why when we look at the Battanians. So let's go ahead and do that now. So the Battanians, in my opinion, and in many of your opinions, at least if the previous video is any indication, are pretty much based on various Celtic groups. And a lot of you threw out Welsh, and I'll talk more about the Welsh later. But to me, it's several groups. You can't really single out one, although it's very tempting. And I don't think that picking one and just going straight off that is something that they would do anyways. So, as I have up on screen there, their armor appears to be very Gallic or Germanic. I believe in this video you even see someone wearing like a Kulis helmet, or it might be a Montefortino type helmet, but it's something that you would see like a Gallic or Germanic warrior wearing, even in if you play Total War Rome 2. They've got a couple guys in this game that look almost like they're taken right out of that game. The reason so many people were throwing Welsh out there is because of the strong archers and the longbowmen that are the sort of cornerstone of the faction. And yeah, I mean, I can see that. The Welsh in particular were famous for their longbowmen and used them extensively to try to fight off the Normans when they invaded England. And I think they used them all the way up through... They used them extensively through the 1400s, and I think even into the 1500s, and very, very rarely, but they still did use them all the way up to the early 1600s. So much, much later than anybody else. And I think at some points they were just outright competing with gunpowder weapons like early muskets and arquebuses and whatever. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of similarities here, and I think there's enough to draw some conclusions. But with the Vaegirs faction, there just isn't quite enough there. They do fit a lot of the same roles from like a gameplay standpoint. You know, you have a faction that's offense oriented, they have good archers, but are they really related at all? Like, you have a faction that's based on Russia, and they look very Eastern, they look very Russian, and then you have another faction that looks very, to me they look very Germanic. They have the furs, they have, like, I don't know if you could call it brigandine armor, because it looks a bit too rough to be brigandine, but they have, like, mismatched, like, leather and steel plate type stuff, or it's probably iron plate. But yeah, I think the gear doesn't really look Russian at all to me. There's no real Eastern vibe to it. It looks very Celtic. It looks very Germanic to me. And obviously, with the Russians, you don't really have the whole longbow thing going on. I don't know how extensively Russia used longbows prior to like crossbows and stuff like that. I know that the Germans used crossbows pretty extensively, because crossbows, although it doesn't really seem like it, are actually a lot easier to produce when you don't have a lot of resources. Because in order to make a longbow, you need a really, really long, sturdy piece of wood that can't be, you know, bowed or warped or anything. And most longbows are about as tall as the person firing them. So think about trying to find like 6 feet of wood that's like unbent, unwarped, versus a crossbow that's, you know, fairly compact. And then the same goes for the arrows. Your average longbow arrow is like 3 feet or something ridiculous. Maybe not that long, but I think it's like 30 inches. I mean, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong there, but longbow arrows are pretty long, because they need to be fairly big to stay, you know, on their trajectory. If they're too short, they'll start flying all over the place. Whereas with a crossbow, you only need a fairly short piece of wood to make a bolt. I think average bolts are like 10 inches. So you need a lot less resources to make, well, I don't know if resource is the right word, but you need a lot less specific resources in order to make a crossbow. And so history shows us that the Germans, at least, favored the crossbow over the longbow into the medieval, or I guess the Middle Ages, just because it was easier to produce them. And so I would assume with the Russians it was probably something similar, but I could be totally wrong there. I'm not super familiar with Russian history. Anywho, we do know that the Britons, specifically the Welsh, were very, very fond of their longbows. And so I think if you take the Celts as a whole, they fit the Battanians perfectly. The other issue here is, again, we don't know what their cavalry looks like, but if I had to guess, I'm going to assume that their cavalry is very light cavalry from what we've seen, because they do not seem to have any heavy armor. And if you look at the Vaegirs cavalry, they have pretty heavy cavalry at the highest tier. They're basically knights. I don't remember if they're called knights or if they're called something else. I thought they were called lancers, and I saw somewhere else referring to them as knights, but you get the idea. They have very heavy cavalry. They almost look like cataphracts or something, but I guess they're not quite. I don't think their horses are armored, and so there's a couple distinctions there that they don't quite meet in order to be cataphracts. Also, they don't carry bows, which I think most cataphracts do. So, yeah, the cavalry I don't think is going to match up if they have any cavalry. Again, I don't think there's any in this particular video. I mean, obviously, like, the lords are mounted, but I don't think we see too much mounted combat aside from that. But I could be totally wrong. Anywho, they are located in the northwest of the map, south of the Sturgians, and just slightly east of the Valandians. And so, from all the factions that we've compared to in Warband, they just geographically don't really add up. They would have had to migrate pretty significantly in order to end up in a different spot. And another thing to mention with the Rhodoks as well is that we know from lore they were originally part of the Swadian Kingdom, or what used to be the Swadian Kingdom. And if we look at the Valandians, who are, you know, basically Swadia, they are occupying the region that the Rhodoks will eventually occupy. And so it makes sense that the Rhodoks were actually part of the Valandians, and they just broke away, and so that kingdom separated into two, and Swadia kind of went off and did its own thing and took over more of the center that was basically a void left by the Empire. Here we have the gameplay combat shown off right now. We can see those archers. They do have longbows, and we see some, looks like very low tier infantry behind them with small little shields, and it looks like they have like swords and axes. So to me they look very Celtic, and so you guys will have to let me know if you agree, but I think this sort of like, I don't know, hopefully resolves it, because I just don't, at least in my opinion, I don't think Rhodoks has anything to do with them. I don't think the Vaegirs have anything to do with them. I think the Vaegirs are doing their complete own thing. They're going to come in from somewhere else outside of the map that we see. And I talk more about that in the other video if you haven't watched that one already. If you haven't seen the video going on in the background of this already, I highly recommend you watch that. I will put a link to it in the description, but you can find it on PC Gamer's channel as well. And yeah, so hopefully that helped clear things up for you guys. I know I'm really interested in the factions of Bannerlord and just anything Bannerlord in general. So I'm happy to do videos like this. I know you guys were requesting more, and so here is more. I will be doing a video covering the Siege gameplay next, I think. I'd like to kind of just review that video and analyze some of the stuff that we see, some of the features that have been added, because it's just chock full of them. And so I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully you guys are too. But anyways, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I really look forward to seeing you guys here for the next video.